Okay, viewers, so I was incredibly entertained by the first episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and actually I was much more engaged in the first episode than I initially thought I was going to be. You see, in my pre-watch video, I talked about how the trailer made the series seem like an 80s buddy cop movie, like, Eddie Murphy in Another 48 Hours. But it actually brought a lot more depth than that, and not just to Bucky. There's a tremendous amount of depth being thrown at us here for Sam's character as well, and I like it. Okay, so I'm going to issue a spoiler alert here. I am going to be talking about a couple of deep concepts here, and I probably will be spoiling the episode a bit to do so. So if you'd rather come back to this review after you've seen the episode, I'll put a chapter marker in the description below. Okay, so let's address Sam's bad decision, right? The idea of giving the shield back and why he made that decision. The mistake that Sam makes in the beginning of this episode is that he misunderstands how Steve Rodgers approaches the concepts of good and evil. You see, for Sam, symbols and the people who, don those symbols are inextricably linked, right? So in other words, Steve Rodgers is Captain America and Captain America is Steve Rodgers, and the two can't really be pulled apart without lessening one or the other. Because of this, Sam can't really envision himself donning the shield and ever being on the same level as Steve, which is complete nonsense, quite honestly, right? For Steve Rodgers, good and evil were concepts that you had to choose to pursue. It's the primary reason why he couldn't sign those peace accords from Civil War, because it would have removed his ability to choose the path of goodness that's in front of him. Oh, and by the way, who was the first Avenger to follow Steve Rodgers? Sam. Sam made the choice to do good, to follow what he thought was the best pathway to good, which was to go with Captain America. Now, make no mistake about it, it's absolutely within Sam's character to pick up that mantle and don the shield and become Captain America. So what's really stopping him? Well, 2 words: imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the feeling that at any given moment, someone or something is going to expose you for being a fraud, right? Something other than what everyone else thinks of you. And it actually can be a fairly debilitating feeling for a lot of people who walk around constantly with the fear of being exposed. Now, at the ceremony, when they're honoring Steve Rodgers and Sam's giving his speech, he states, "Symbols are nothing without the men and women who give them meaning." Now, it's a great phrase, and I think Steve probably would have agreed with most of it. However, he would have added that we all have the right, the honor, and the responsibility to don symbols of great goodness and hope. No one symbol belongs to any person. They belong to humanity. Symbols are the ways that we speak to each other without words. They're universal and unifying. And I think Steve would have also added that those who can bear more should do more. And Sam can certainly bear more than the average person, right? He can bear the weight of the hopeless. What I particularly love about this ceremony scene is when Sam's making his speech and the camera pans to Rhodey, and you can tell from Rhodey's face that he doesn't really agree with what Sam's saying. I mean, it's not like a huge objection, but it's just the very subtle, and thank you, Don Cheadle, again, for pulling this off perfectly. Just very subtle kind of disagreements with what Sam's saying. See, I think Rhodey understands the concept that when a person is given power, it tends to magnify the core of that individual, right? Remember in the first, how Captain America got his powers, the super serum. And the reason why it worked so well on Steve was because all it did was magnify his want to help others, his courage to do good. Whereas with other people, it sort of gave rise to bullying and other bad traits. I think Rhodey understood that even though he disagreed with Steve Rodgers in Civil War, he knew that Steve was trying to do good, or at least what he thought was good. When Rhodey asks Sam why he didn't take up the mantle and become Captain America, you can tell that in reality, what Rhodey wants to do is turn that into a statement and say, take up the shield, become Captain America. It's actually the opposite of what Sam says in his speech. It's because the world has changed that you need to look to the past and you need to look to symbols of stability. And Captain America remained or is a symbol of stability. However, the problem, of course, is until Sam can get over his imposter syndrome, he's not ready to pick up that mantle and don the shield of Captain America. Now that brings me to Bucky. I don't think it was some great surprise that Bucky is still trying to deal with the psychological ramifications of having been the Winter Soldier, right? I mean, I think we all knew he was going to have to be pursuing some level of forgiveness in this series. I do like the storyline, though, that he's working with the father of that innocent man that he killed when he was Winter Soldier, because it sets up this beautifully disturbing scenario where you know that eventually he's most likely going to have to tell the father that he was the one who killed the man's son. And that will provide peace to the father in knowing what happened, but also a great heartache because you could tell the man has a lot of love for Bucky. Now, something that I didn't think about until this episode aired was the thought that maybe Bucky doesn't get to find forgiveness for himself. You know, the psychiatrist sort of calls him out and says that it's garbage, right? When she asks Bucky what is he looking for, what does he want, and Bucky says peace, she sort of brushes it aside and says, you're lying. But you know what? I could see a scenario where he is telling the truth there. He does want peace, but he just may not believe that he ever actually deserves it. And that's not the same thing. You can want something, not pursue it, and just feel like you never really deserved it. And this, of course, creates a connection with Steve Rodgers again, right? Because Steve was the one who fought for Bucky because he knew that the real Bucky was someone who always chose to pursue good, not the Winter Soldier and pursuing, death. For Steve, as awkward as it sounds, the actions that Bucky took as Winter Soldier could very well be rationalized away because they weren't him. They were never his choice to pursue evil. But for Bucky, he doesn't really see it that way. He sees that it's his body, his mind, and therefore he must take responsibility for pursuing that choice of evil. So where does all this leave us for our first episode? Well, honestly, in our WandaVision walkthrough companion, we spent a lot of time talking about Vision and looking at Vision, and I kind of like the idea of having something that will always be kind of pursuing throughout. And so for this watch companion, one of the things that I'd like to just keep tabs on is whether or not both Sam and Bucky are able to exorcise the ghost of Steve Rodgers. Because just even from this first episode, we can tell that Steve's unwavering belief in both of them as good men, as human beings, has become more haunting than uplifting. And at some point, they're going to have to deal with that in some meaningful way. And so I'm really curious to see how they do this. Okay, so a fantastic first episode. I loved it. I was incredibly entertained and blown away by the depth again of Sam's side of this. So in the comments below, let me know. I'm curious. Do you think that Sam made the right choice actually in giving up the shield and it just kind of went the wrong way? Or do you think he never should have given up the shield at all? I'm curious about how you'll answer that question. And if you haven't already and you're interested, subscribe to the channel. And if you've just got some extra time on your hands, check out some of my other content. Okay, have a great rest of your day.